Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get singles for all your Force of Will and other trading card games, as well as these amazing patrons.
Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video.
Hey guys, what's going on? It's Paul, and today I'm bringing you a tournament report for GP Minnesota, which, we're about a week out from, but now we're going to be talking about it all in depth now that all the information is available for us. So, without further ado, this is the ruler breakdown. There were 16 Brunhild, 15 Hanzo, 13 Lucifer, 11 Gil, 10 Keurig, 5 Loki, 4 Ayu, 3 Freyla, and then some other rulers as well that didn't really get really out there for us to look at. But we should be really especially paying attention to that Ayu number, because 3 of those 4 rulers actually got into the top cut, which is saying a lot for a ruler that wasn't very well respected or very well seen in major tournament play up until now. There was always like 1 or 2 Ayus, maybe at most. I don't think there were even 2, but in previous GPs there was maybe an Ayu, but not multiple. 3 out of the 4 is pretty huge. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit today, but I really want to talk about Gil, because we saw Jean-Paul Klintworth come in with Gil and do some really good work. Getting into the top cut and winning the whole thing. This ruler is probably the best one we've got right now, and it's hard not to see why. So right now we're looking at Leaf Assassin as one of the main elemental tools that Gil is utilizing now more than it has in the past. And Leaf Assassin is really important because it acts not only as a body and as an elemental to fuel Gil, but it also operates as a way of getting things off the board in a more aggressive style format. It's a really proactive resonator that does a lot of damage to things that are relatively decent. You reveal 3 elementals in your hand, and suddenly you're getting rid of your opponent's Leaf Paladins. You're getting rid of your opponent's Paelis, forcing them to use strength counters to make it survive. You're revealing 3 or 4 other elementals in your hand, including itself and some, Elemental Blade, Ultra Awakening, these other really good cards in your hand, which, your opponent really can't get much out of that unless they're playing Lucifer and get those cards out of your hand themselves. But you're revealing these cards in hand that your opponent knows you have because you played a Leaf Paladin or something, and you're making use of those in a very proactive way, getting things off the board. So Leaf Assassin is really starting to become one of the best resonators in the deck outside of Leaf Paladin and the leaves that go along with Leaf Paladin. It's really good, and you should be looking at this card as one of the main reasons Gil is doing so well right now. In addition to that, John Paul is playing Insight, which is a way not only for him to dig deeper into the deck for free, because you're floating a green will with Gil's effect and then using that, and it's a spirit magic, so you can do that, but you're digging down into the deck 2 more cards. You're discarding one of those into the grave. You're looking and seeing, is there anything in these 2 cards that I can put into my hand to improve my situation? And then, of course, you're milling a card at the end of turn, which might be another elemental. So that's always really good to have. And spirit magics, of course, not only work through Gil, they fuel your Lorite. So you don't need as many in the deck itself. And because if Lorite gets milled, it's totally fine. You can just remove Insight and 2 other spirit magics up until that point and just put it right back into your hand to use later. So Insight's also a really solid card. We haven't seen a lot of it, but it's clear that it has done a lot of work. In addition to that, in the sideboard, he's playing a white Magic Stone, which is really good considering he's also playing Sealing the Gates to the Darkness. And this card is really important too, because if you're playing against Lucifer or any other blacklist and you're really worried about Jeanne d'Arc, this card just outright removes it from the game. It doesn't destroy it, it just takes it out, and that is probably the best way for Gil to answer this card. And in general, Gil as a ruler, as a strategy, is a deck that really works to sort of flex in the way that it needs to without putting too many cards into its main deck to sort of answer its opponent's stuff. So even though the deck doesn't have a ton of really good answers to things like Karura or Jeanne d'Arc, if by just including a couple of cards it can make something happen to where suddenly it's on the offense. It has its front foot in front of it again. And this is why this deck is so incredibly strong. And it's hard to see, it's hard not to see why this deck won in general, because of all of this flexibility that it has in its sideboard and in its main board to sort of deal with these high tier threats. So congratulations to John Paul for getting first place. On to Caleb Tuma's IU list. If you're not familiar with IU and how it's been performing in the meta so far, this deck has not been showing up consistently. There have been maybe one or two times where one single IU deck has come into the top 8 in some GPs that are not in the United States. However, in this GP, it was really unique that IU made such a huge burst onto the scene, because we saw Gil end up winning the entire tournament, but IU in general has a really good way of sort of dealing with Gil. IU in general has the ability to attain a bunch of simple skills, to pump itself with its souls, and to be able to run pretty much any copy of any card in the game, which gives it a high level of utility. The problem is you can only use one of those cards, right? But in general, what we're seeing here is IU being able to be piloted by really strong players and being put into top 4 situations. IU is very good for that reason. Now, I don't know too much about Caleb Tuma as a player, but I have seen the name before, so I know he's a good player. And it's clear to see that the kind of the thought processes behind what he's putting into the IU deck, there isn't a ton of variation, but he's made certain choices in the list to help him sort of skirt around the Gil matchup, including the Glint of Insight, Thought Control, and the Look of Corruption, to sort of get stuff out of their hand, which is probably the best thing you can do if you're not piloting Gil. So congratulations to Caleb for getting second place. All the other IU lists from this tournament are going to be down in the description below, with all of the top 8 lists for GP Minnesota, so make sure you check those out. Last but not least, we have Joey Schilling's aggressive Brunhild list from Team Rogues Guild, and what you can see here is that the March Hare of Valhalla is being played as a means of dealing a whole bunch of damage and keeping your life high. And that's really important for an aggressive list, because then it's really hard for your opponent to just sort of steal the game from you. In addition to that, they're also playing the Sorceress of the Moon, which is a good way of having a 6/6 flyer on the board. And of course, since Brunhild is trying to use its runes proactively to gain itself a really good situation, and the runes here on March Hare and on Sorceress of the Moon are pretty generic, they're not white specific, having those available in a proactive way makes these cards a lot more of a threat later into the game you go. And of course, to capitalize on the fact that this is a more aggressive build, Joey opted to play Acolyte of the Sun and Gem Mallet Panda as ways to generate mana for himself. In addition to that, he's also playing the Life Stealing Altar and the Soul Returning Altar, and this is, you know, the same. It's an altered card. So you play Life Stealing Altar, you J-activate, you flip the Soul Returning Altar, and then you get to play a Life Stealing Altar later in the game if you want to, and then you get to have both altars active onto the field. And they do different things, of course. So the Life Stealing Altar, if something dies, you can pay 1 to draw a card. Later as the game goes, if it's, you know, a more controlling matchup, you get to outpace your opponent's card advantage, which is really, really good. And the Soul Returning Altar allows you to sacrifice your own Resonators to deal -4/-4 to your opponent in one of their Resonators. Now, why that's important is that helps you to negate some of their removal, which is what makes this card so strong. Including during the stream, there was talk about how this is single-handedly one of the most important cards in the entire deck, next to the Air Orphica combo, which you can see in the list here, and of course Protection of the Angels, which is a very strong +8/+8 that can't be cancelled. Very good card, defensive wise, which is a really good way of you to use March Hare not only as an offensive tool, but as a defensive tool. If you want to cast something onto that and they try and kill it, you just Protection of the Angels and suddenly you're at a ton of life. But in general, Brunhild being placed into the top 4 even was a little bit surprising, considering Brunhild was not favored going into this GP. But as you can see, as we see things like Gil rise to the top as being the best deck, Brunhild and other decks are going to have to become more aggressive to deal with that. So that was Joey Schilling's top 3 list. Link is down in the description below, as well as the other decks that we're not going to mention today. They're down in the down in the description. Sorry. Let us know in the comment section what you liked about that so far. And now we're going to get into my thoughts. And I have a few thoughts, and most of that is coming from the commentary that we had on stream. So if you were not able to look at the stream, you can watch all 8 hours if you wish. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of get an amended version here. So it's pretty clear that Gil is the best ruler of the format. He's been topping GP after GP after GP. He's very, very good. And it's hard not to see why, again, because when you look at the field, we're seeing things like Ayu, Kirik, Lucifer, Brunhild, Machines perhaps probably have something. But even if Gil loses to Machines have a really hard time against the rest of this field. So this is kind of what we're looking at here. These 5 other rulers that can come in and do some work. So what does Gil have to deal with these? Well, you'll recall he has a Leaf Assassin, really good card to be able to use, highly useful. Elemental, deals damage, gets stuff off the board, makes it hard for aggro to win. But on top of that, you also have Leaf Paladin, which is a really good way for him to get elementals into his hand for Leaf Paladin, or for Leaf Assassin. But then it also is workable with 5th Element, which, instead of being a 2 multiplier, it's a 300 multiplier. And that goes a long way considering it targets J Resonators as well. So if you want to flip with your Brunhild, well, it's gone. If you want to flip with your Kirik, well, that's gone too. If you want to flip with your Ayu and try and go for the win, holding on to 5th Element for the right time is a really good way for Gil to ruin those plans. So we're seeing a lot of secondary win conditions being placed into the J Ruler, if not the primary win condition. 5th Element, Leaf Assassin, Leaf Paladin, ruin all that. But let's say that Gil's been on the back foot, right? Gil's been struggling to sort of put damage on board or to establish himself. Surely that's the way to stop him, right? But he has Spiritual Guidance as well as White Leaf to not only gain life, but Spiritual Guidance is probably one of the best spirit magics in the deck. And generally what you see Gil doing is when he's ready to J-activate and gain his life back, he will float a will by removing an elemental from his graveyard. He will then J-activate, and on his flip side, he will remove another elemental to generate 2 more will, put those elementals back in the deck on his turn, search out Spiritual Guidance, play it for free, draw 2 more cards, and then he'll gain 100 life for every card that he has in his hand after that. So Gil is able to stabilize himself while also putting himself out there and in a proactive way. And then Gil as a body is really hard to get rid of. He's an 11/11, which means Karura does have an edge, but then Blackleaf exists to sort of shrink it if they want to try and exchange with your Gil. So that makes things a little bit more difficult. And then of course Arrival of the Hero, other forms of removal, Insight to search out your stuff. All of that is really strong. So Gil has ways to get around these other decks. Most of those are built into his main deck, in fact, but there's even stuff in his sideboard, like we talked earlier about Sealing the Gates of Darkness to get rid of Jean d'Arc. All of these tools Gil has access to, which means that Gil should probably be banned. As a ruler, he's really strong. Green is still the best color in Force of Will. Other colors are gaining steam. I'll say that. I mean, we're seeing a decent black list and a decent white list topping consistently. So that's out there. But Gil continues to be the ruler that wins time and time again. Being piloted by some of the best players in the world, that gives you kind of a clue as to how good Gil as a ruler is. How good is this deck? And I would say very, very good. So that being said, what cards do you want to see banned? Of course, I want Gil to be banned, but what do you think? There are tons of other cards that might be ban worthy in the format. If they're kind of format warping or a little bit crazy, what do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. And of course, while you're down in the comments section, why not hit subscribe, ring that bell, and then hit like if you like the video or hit dislike if you dislike the video. We'd love to hear from you guys what you thought about this video and everything else you have going on in your Force of Will life. Anyway, guys, this has been Paul. Good talking with you, and I'll see you next time.